If you are watching this, I would just assume that you meet the following requirements, since they will be absolutely mandatory for the following part. You need to have an Apple developer account, which will cost you $99 per year. Your app should also be in a state that it is submission ready, so there shouldn't be any errors or problems with it. Please do keep in mind that you should do a lot of testing on different devices to make sure that your app is really ready for the store before you publish it. We will now go over the process step by step on how we can submit our app to the App Store. And we will begin our journey on the Apple developer website. You can find this website at developer.apple.com. And you can then log into the site with your developer account credentials. The first thing we will need for our app is an app ID. We can find the IDs in the developer account when we click on Certificates, IDs, and Profiles in the Navigator column to the left. When the site loads, I can then under Identifiers select the item App IDs, and this will bring up all my app IDs. There are two different ways of creating app IDs here. You can either create an explicit app ID which will be valid for one specific app, or you can create a so-called wildcard app ID. Usually we will be using the wildcard app IDs since this is convenient and what we are going to look at in a second. An explicit app ID, on the other hand, is only really needed if we are enabling certain features or services in our app, such as in-app purchases, Game Center, or push notifications. If we are using these, we will need to create an ID that contains support for these specific features. But since we aren't using any of these in our example app, we can go with a wildcard ID. So to create one, I can simply here click on this little plus sign and create a new app ID. I do have to add some information about my new ID here, starting with the app ID description. This will just be a name for the ID. So I'm just going to call it Room Wildcard. So this will be a wildcard ID for our project. You can pick whatever you like. I can then scroll down. The app ID's prefix can't be changed since it is a team ID tied to the developer account, so yours will be probably different. Finally, under the section app ID suffix, I can choose between an explicit or a wildcard app ID. For the explicit ID, I would have to specify the complete identifier. So for our Simon Says app, which we are using here to give you an example on how to submit your app, I would have to use com.room.simon-says, which is the bundle identifier from the project. But we did say that we wanted to use a wildcard app ID. So I will select this radio button to create a wildcard ID. In this case, I only have to specify the first part of the app ID without the app's name itself. I can then use the star or asterisk symbol to insert a placeholder for the app name, which will allow me to use this ID for multiple app projects. So let's just write com.room.asterisk so that I can just use com.room for all apps using this ID and just append the app name at the end, which we will get to soon. I can then continue scrolling down and select features the app ID should support. I will just leave all of these unchecked since our app really doesn't need them. And I can then click on continue at the very bottom and verify all of this and say that everything is correct. I have the description room wildcard, the identifier with com.room, and no specific services enabled. So this is looking good, and I can click on register to register the ID, which has now created it, and I can finish the process with a click on Done. I now have an app ID, which I will later need to submit my application. But we will need even more stuff, beginning with a distribution certificate. This is a certificate we can create as Apple developers and is used for publishing and distributing apps. In the left column, I can just select All under Certificates. And I can then see that we have certificates for iOS development. But if we want to actually publish an app, we will need a production or distribution certificate. So if I click on this, I can see that there are currently none existing, which would likely be the case if you haven't published an app before. What is really convenient for us is that we can see here that this can be easily done from within Xcode, where we can request the certificate, and we'll do this later while we are actually in the process of submitting the app. So we don't have to worry about it now. The next thing we need is a provisioning profile, which we will need specifically for our app to have a profile we can sign the app with. We can find these profiles if we scroll down a little under provisioning profiles. And again, we will need a profile for distribution, of course, since we are actually planning to publish an app. If I click on it, we can once again see that Xcode is the simplest way to create such a profile. So again, we don't need to do anything here now, but we can create this profile directly in Xcode when we have our app project opened. So this seems to conclude our work that we have to do here on the developer website, and we can return to Xcode, where we can take a look at our project settings and how they are currently looking. All right, back in Xcode, I can, in the project settings, when the target app is selected, see that for the signing, automatically manage signing is checked, and below it reads, Xcode will create and update profiles, app IDs, and certificates. This means that Xcode will actually do all of this complicated stuff for us, and we don't really have to take care of it ourselves. We can see that there is already a provisioning profile, as well as a signing certificate, which is really, really convenient in the newer Xcode versions where a lot of these steps are now automated and work really well. And this works because I have selected the account Timothy Meixner for the team here, which is our developer account that can be used to publish apps. We can also see our bundle identifier here, which is important because we will need it shortly. It does match our wildcard ID with the beginning com.room, and then we have the app name, Simon Says. We will use this in the next step when we need to create our app in iTunes Connect to make sure everything gets recognized correctly. All right, we now have all the prerequisites taken care of. It can be a little confusing in the beginning, and I do not know of any developers who have not at least once had problems with all these certificates, profiles, and signing. Since this has been automated in Xcode, it has become quite easier though. If you still run into any errors or problems, please let us know and tell us what your problem is, and we can find a solution together. In the next video, we will continue by creating our app in iTunes Connect, where we can add metadata for the app, which will ultimately enable us to upload the app binary and submit it for review.